run with the team at Legal and General Investment Management some £6 billion of assets. The wider team runs 60 billion. Kind of outside of the fund management side, I am passionate about diversity and inclusion, which involves giving back to others and trying to get better representation in the corporate sphere.
Now, Brother Justin, if somebody said, again, I know you have introduced yourself, but if somebody asked you and put on spot and say, who is Justin? What could you say?
What would I say? Well, I grew up in Manchester, and my parents, my mum is from Grenada, my dad is from Nigeria. So I've got, those both Caribbean and West African influences on my life. But as I say, I'm dedicated to create an equal playing field for all. And that is something that's really important to me. But I'd say investment leader, wanting to give back, a father and a husband.
Okay, thank you. Now, why do you think you were called Britain's most influential investor? What did you do to deserve that?
Well, I wouldn't call myself Britain's most influential investor, but I think that over time, I've been able to build up a reasonable client bank, managing 6 billion. There's not very many retail fund managers that are leading on £6 billion of assets. And that continues to grow. But also outside of the fund management side, I think it's really important that there is a focus on leadership in society for me, and really trying to get better representation across not only the asset management industry, not only the financial services, but really across all industries, to create senior Black and actually ethnic minority leaders right across the board. Because at the moment, you look across all top businesses, limited fund managers, limited managing directors, limited people on the boards in terms of ethnic origin. So I think now is a time to really try and change that.
I'm trying, I think me and our viewers are trying to peep through the hole, the keyhole of your life. Could you take us through your life as a Cheetham Hill chip shop and kebab seller to the most influential investor in Britain?
Okay, so I mean, I grew up in inner city Manchester, and lived in single parent home. My mum was focused and dedicated on education, being a teacher. I think that was really important to me. It meant that it rubbed off on me, and I realised that the way to, climb the social mobility ladder was actually through education. I think that was really important. She also taught me about hard work. She worked really hard, having a job and taking care of 2 boys. That taught me that hard work can get you to, and she always told me that hard work can get you to where you are, and you have to work hard if you want to succeed. I think that's rubbed off on me as well. But also, I do think that people underestimate that luck plays a part. If you look at, every single time I've moved into different businesses in the City of London, the people I've been working with, my mentors, my bosses have been excellent. That to me, some of that is luck. So yeah, I can put it down to hard work. I can say resilience. I can say all of these things, but luck does play a part, and I think that's really important. But what I'm now dedicated to do, what I really want to do, is create that luck, so to speak, for other people. Let other people have those mentors. Let other people have people to help them navigate these corporate workplaces. Because I tell you what, when you're the only one, when you're the only Black person on a particular floor, the only Black person in a team, it's actually very difficult. It's very difficult because you feel like an outsider. And okay, it changes as you get more senior. You start to feel more of yourself, but it's very hard to be your authentic self in the workplace, particularly when you first start.
Can you please add on that, maybe as an inspiration? Which schools did you go to?
Yes.
I'd like to send my son there.
Well, I went to I went to two schools in three schools in Manchester. You count the sixth form college, St Anne's school in Crumpsall, then St Monica's in Prestwich, and Holy Cross in Bury, and I suppose they're all Catholic schools. I was baptized Catholic, and they had a huge influence of actually white Irish people in as you'd expect, being a Catholic schools. They weren't very diverse. Throughout my life, I've been either the only one or only two or three black people in my class. But however, there was a time when I moved down to London. My mum got a job in London as a teacher, and I moved to Wood Green, and I went to a school called Knoll Park in North London. And the difference in diversity was shocking. It was huge difference. I was like 7 years old at the time, and just that did open my eyes to not being the only one. And when I went back to my school in Manchester, my mum moved back to Manchester with me. I think that did hold me in good stead, actually.
Now, in your conversation, you've been talking about assets. I think in layman terms, our people love to know, what are assets that you are dealing with?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So typically, if you've got a decent size or decent rump of cash, you might go to a financial advisor to say, actually, what do I do with this cash? The financial advisor would say to you, well, you can put it in the bank. But obviously, you put it in the bank, inflation tends to be higher than the interest rate you get in the bank. So over time, the money you get minus inflation is actually going down. So what people try and do to improve on inflation, they invest it into markets, right? They invest it into companies. They invest it into bonds, etc., commodities, property, etc., etc. So when I say assets, it's this cash that financial advisors are advising on, which goes into funds that essentially that I run. Now, I run funds that invest in what's called multi-asset funds. So they invest in lots and lots of different asset classes. So it's not just in stock, it's not just in companies, it's not just in company debts, it's not just in commodities, it's in everything. And the idea is by putting it together in everything, you diversify. You're not putting all your eggs in one basket, and you can grow that money over time in a less volatile way. So it's smoother over time rather than being volatile.
You've spoken two things that have attracted my attention. One of them is assets, and one of them is diversity. Now, during the course of your duty and these assets you are managing, my research shows that there are quite a few people from the ethnic minority, say Africans, who are investing, who have got some kind of asset, they're dealing in assets or even bonds and stuff like that. Do you share that view with me, and why do you think it's like that?
What's the question? Sorry, just repeat that again. Sorry.
Why? Let me rephrase this.
Yeah.
Why is it that ethnic minorities, especially Black Africans in the UK or in Europe, are not interested in investing in assets or bonds and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think part of it is, well, people that I speak to, part of it is education. So having understanding of financial markets takes a long time. There are a lot of people who do part-time trading, and they tend to do very well over a certain period, And then as soon as something goes against them, they don't understand what risk they're taking. Therefore, therefore they lose a lot of money. It takes time to understand financial markets. So it's education, but it's also patience. It's patience that, there may be years that you're not making any money, but if you're not losing assets, you're not losing money. Sorry, that's important as well. To actually, to be able to stand still and be proud of standing still. So I think it's education, and I think part of it is patience. A lot of people that I speak to, individuals, when I talk to them about how much returns you can actually gain in markets, it might be over the long term, it might be 7-8% a year in companies. But people are impatient, and that's not enough for them. They want 10%, they want 15%, they want 20%. But if you want those types of returns, you have to recognize the only way you're going to get those types of returns is by taking a lot of risk. And actually, it does mean that when you get it wrong, it can be very painful.
Now, I think this attracts the question which my viewers could be asking is about bonds and shares. What are bonds and shares? I think this is the right platform to address that.
Yes, no, it's a really good question. So a share essentially is a company. So companies issue shares for people to take a proportion of the overall company. What does that mean? It means when the company does well and earnings go up, you share in that profitability, and the share price goes up, and vice versa. It goes down, it goes down. Now, bonds, on the other hand, bonds are company debt. So let's say an IOU. So let's say I'm a company and you're the investor, and you give me £100. Then I will say to you, okay, thank you for that £100. I'm the company. I'm going to use it to invest in buying new machinery. And what I'll say to you, Mr. Investor, is I will give you 7% return, let's say, on the money that you've invested. Yeah. So what I'm hoping is that by taking that money off you and investing it into my business, I'll be able to generate a return. I'll be able to give you, let's say I generate 20%, I'll be able to give you 7%, and I'll take 13% to reinvest in the business. So that's company debt. But then there's also government debt. And government debt is when the government goes out and says, look, we need to borrow money for, to fund, businesses during, with all these furlough schemes. And again, the government will say to me, okay, Justin, you're Mr. Fund Manager, we will give you 4% on your money. So overall, debt tends to be more secure, right? Because you've got certainty, or some certainty, around what you're going to get, what the interest rate you're going to get. The only difficulty with debt is if the business doesn't exist when it's time to pay you, or the government doesn't exist when it's time to pay you. Companies, because the earnings can be volatile, they tend to be. There's no guarantee, there's less certainty that you're going to get that you're going to get an increase. But clearly, the more risk you take, the more reward you can get. So typically, shares tend to outperform bonds over time because you're investing in a more risky risky vehicle.
Now, as an expert, can you give us tips on when can someone know that this is the right time for me to invest in shares or bonds?
It's a really good question. And okay, so I obviously can't give financial advice, but let me kind of talk to you about a few themes. I think it's important to be a long-term investor. I think that short-termism is what too many investors focus on, and they end up taking the money out of the market at the wrong time. So, for example, if you invested £100,000, you had £100,000 in the stock in the stock market in 1987. Yeah, 1987. Today, that £100,000 would be worth £2.3 million. Yeah. So that's if you just held it in the market and you just bought the FTSE 100, and you stepped away and you said, look, there's my money in the market. there you go. It'd be worth 2.3 million pounds. So that's the importance of long-term investing. Now, if you miss just the top 10 days, so 10 days, the best 10 days in that period, then your overall book would be 1 million pounds. So still, decent growth over time, but missing those top 10 days was effectively £1 million over that period. So that should tell you the importance of being in the market and remaining in the market. So it's about timing your time in the market rather than timing the market, if that, so to speak.
Now, there is this statement I always hear over and over again, but I don't get the jinx of it. I'm like, oh, I don't know what this means. They will tell you, Eric, for example, during the Brexit time, there was a lot of issues in Parliament where it was we are getting out of Europe or not. And it could go like today, the shares are falling down, index, FTSE, and all that jargon. I know most of people watching this program could share my concern. What does that mean? Why does the Prime Minister say that will affect stock exchange?
Okay, so what stock markets don't like is uncertainty. What companies don't like is uncertainty, because it means that those earnings that as an investor, you think you're going to get certain earnings. It means that it creates noise around those earnings. It creates uncertainty around what those earnings will be next year, the year after that. So what Brexit creates is it creates this future uncertainty around what company earnings are going to be. So the greater that uncertainty, the more volatile, so to speak, or the more risky those shares become. So anything that's negative and creates greater uncertainty than you thought when you first invested is negative, tends to be negative for shares. And that's exactly what's happened. All of this, when they go and negotiate a new trade deal, until the Prime Minister comes with a paper and says, right, we're negotiating a trade deal, this is what it is, this, and this, you've got huge amounts of uncertainty around Brexit negotiations.
Let me come back home again. Let me talk about Nigeria. I did attend an event in the city whereby the Nigeria government was flogging to the diaspora what they called the federal government bonds. And it was like, I was there for like 2 hours, but I left with nothing. I was like, what is this? What are the federal government bonds? What are they? What do they do?
Yeah. So I think that was the event that I was going to attend. I didn't actually get to attend it, actually. So federal government bonds, when I spoke to you about debt and bonds and these IOUs, this essentially is you giving the Nigerian government money and them saying that in 5-10 years time, you will get all your money back and they will give you a certain level of interest over that period. So for example, the Nigerian interest tends to be higher than, say, UK interest, because Nigeria tends to be a more risky country in terms of getting your money back, so to speak. So the interest you can get on Japanese bonds tends to be a lot higher than, let's say, UK bonds.
Let us come back to you again. Let us focus on you as a person. I understand the City of London has given you the Freedom of Something award. Could you take us through that, sir?
Yeah, so it's an honor. So given the work I've done in terms of diversity and inclusion, the city have honored me with the Freedom of the City, it's called. It kind of means, it used to mean that you could do things like take sheep over London Bridge. And why that was important is that back in the day, hundreds of years ago, taking sheep without paying a toll was really important, right? Because it meant that you could feed your family, you could create a business for yourself. Other people had to pay a toll. It also means that if you it meant that you were allowed to bear a sword in central London. Clearly I won't be doing that. And then the last point is, if you were ever caught of treason or murder. When they came to you typically, you used to be able to you used to get the death penalty, the death penalty would be by hanging. So you'd have a choice of a normal rope or a silk rope. So you'd get a choice of silk rope if you had the freedom of the city. Now, clearly, none of those things are enacted now. However, really importantly, it is an honor, and it's an honor that only a few people get. So people like Nelson Mandela, people, essentially a handful of famous people have received the honor. So I am hugely grateful of that. And it just shows that, the work that we're doing has been effective. And that's the most important thing.
I understand when you were given that honor, part of it was about the issues you were trying to stand for and propagate. That was about the inclusivity of ethnic minorities. Is it something like that? What did that entail?
Yeah, so I'm part of a movement called Talk About Black, and Talk About Black really tries to create a platform for discussing ethnicity in particular, but also creating Black leaders in the corporate sphere. Why Black over any other ethnicity is that when you look at the different ethnicities and how well they're represented in the corporate space, Black people tend to be the most underrepresented. And we've identified a number of reasons why. So community, pipeline, entry, progression. These are all things that we've done research on. So community. So it's very hard to detangle the Black experience from social deprivation. So on average now, I'm working in averages and generalizations to some extent, the average Black person tends to have a lower income. That tends to how does that manifest itself? It means that Black people are more prone to violent crime. Black people are more likely to get excluded from school, etc., etc. Then you move on to pipeline. That social deprivation then feeds itself into the pipeline, because it means that Black people tend to, on average, underperform in education. Whilst we start off on a level playing field in terms of education, by the end of schooling, on average, Black people tend to underperform white people on average. Now, of course, you can say, okay, if you look by class, then working class white boys now seem to be the underperformers as a demographic. But on average, Black people underperform their kind of other ethnicities. Then you move on to entry. This is really important. When you get into the industry, or when you're trying to get into the industry, because typically Black people in this country are the first or second generation, they don't have the network of lots of people of having worked in professional services. So when it comes to writing a CV, knowing how to belong in the workplace, it becomes very difficult. Also, there's no role models. So when I look up above me, I don't see any Black people. So when you're more junior, clearly that has a massive impact on whether you apply for a job or not. Then two more, progression. When people get into the workplace, they're not getting into the top jobs, right? They're not getting into the jobs which are generating revenues. They're not getting into jobs like for management, the way I am. They're not managing money. They end up in the back office doing IT or doing operations. So and then last but not least, you look at the Black fund managers, for example. There's thousands of fund managers in the City of London, right? Thousands. Yet they're only, a report in 2017 by New Financial said there were only 12 Black fund managers out of thousands. So clearly people aren't getting to those top positions. Two people, on the C-suite across the whole of asset management, and even fewer when you think about managing directors, partners in law firms. And then last but not least, the final challenge, the final hurdle is it's a taboo to talk about. Nobody until more recently has wanted to talk about ethnicity. because they've been scared. They don't know what terms to use. They don't know how to approach it. So this is what Talk About Black has done. It's looked at those kinks in the hose pipe, as we call them, which stops the talent from flowing through. And we're trying to unkink each one: community, pipeline, entry, progression, and then finally taboo. And it's those initiatives that are focused on unkinking that hose pipe that I think have really created more inclusion in the or started to create more inclusion in the workforce, and actually have the conversation.
At Ben TV, we have worked very closely with organizations like OBV, Operational Black Vote, with Simon Woolley. I think you know him.
Yes.
And one of the most interesting programs I was able to work with them on was the MP shadowing scheme.
Yes.
Now, talk about Black. What is your success story? What have you achieved?
Yeah, no, it's a really, really good question. So let me take you through some of the initiatives. So one of them focused on entry. The entry, that third kink I mentioned, is when you speak to HR teams within financial services, they often say, look, we put out our application we put our application online and no Black people have applied. And part of that is because a lot of Black people aren't aware of the asset of the industry that I work in, number one. Number two, as I say, role models, which I mentioned before. So what we did last November, Talk About Black went out and reached out to different African Caribbean societies at lots of different universities across the UK. We use our networks to try and connect the students to the businesses. We ended up doing an event in Mansion House with the City of London, as it happens. An event in Mansion House, 100 Black students connected them to 13 different businesses. And then we did CEO panel. We did a number of role model events where we're showing Black people do exist in our industry. And that, the feedback from that was fantastic. And a number of those people are now employed within financial services. So we take pride from that. One other one is that I'll give you two others. One other one is mentoring circles. So as I say, this is to do with progression. When people get into the industry, they don't know, a lot of the time they struggle with belonging. Do they really belong in an environment where there are no Black people? It's really difficult for a lot of people. And the way I think about it is every individual has to try and adapt to a particular organization. But the more different you are from everybody else, the more adapting you have to do and the more difficult it is for you to be your authentic self. So what we do every month is we get senior Black people within the industry and we connect them with juniors. So every month we'll have 15 people typically when we could in the office, 15 people on one side of the table, 4 seniors, so 15 people with 0 to 10 years experience on one side of the table, 4 people with 15 years plus experience on the other side of the table. And it's just Q&A. They come to us with their challenges and we help them to navigate it. It might be, my boss has said this to me, how do I react? How do I negotiate my pay? How do I think about promotion? How do I set my career path? How do I redo my CV? It's things like that where senior people who've been there and done it can help people navigate that. And the last one I want to leave you with is following the George Floyd killing. We felt that we had to start to show some leadership, and we didn't know, really what to do to try and show leadership. So we thought what we can do is, demonstrate, try to break down stereotypes, number one, and secondly is really try and get other ethnicities to stand by our side in terms of breaking down some of these structural barriers which stop that Black leadership occurring in our businesses. So we did this campaign. It's called the I Am campaign. And it was really started by a blog that one of the members of Talk About Black wrote, a guy called Gavin Lewis, who works at BlackRock. he wrote this blog, and this blog was broken down into, I am more likely. It started with I am more likely. So I am more likely to be excluded from school. I am more likely to earn a lower salary than other ethnicities, etc. So lots and lots of different stereotypes. About 15 of them, and then it said, but I am human. And then it kind of went into I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a leader, I am this, and essentially then we decided to start this campaign called #IAM, really looking at humanizing different ethnicities and creating allyship that people will stand beside and show that they're not going to stand by and let structural racism continue to take place. And then what you saw is right across the world, people globally, people holding up their I ams and what they were. So it's really three things. So mine was, I'm a father, I'm determined to create change, and I'm a leader. And it just went viral. It went viral. And people are still holding up their arms now, cross industry, global, Canada, Nigeria, US, in Europe, and what that's done, it's now created, I think it's a start to creating true allyship. The big problem with being an ally is that people think it's an identity. People think that, okay, I'm not racist. I support Black progression, and that's it. But actually, being an ally means you have to do something. You have to try and break down those barriers. That's the way you be an ally. And it moves people from holding up a flag to start to think about what I can do. And it's been taken right across the world. Honestly, the feedback has been phenomenal.
I've got one last part as I'm trying to wind up on this program is that I've got a question for you. Why is it that young Black people are more likely to be excluded from school? And you as an organization, what do you do about it?
Yeah, so there are lots of reasons. So the first one is around social deprivation, which you mentioned. I don't think you can get away from that. If you don't have first, second generation that have been through the education system in the UK, that can be, that can have an impact as well. Also, what you can't get away with, and it's very similar to the likeness in adulthood, is that when you look at sentences, the sentences for Black people and non-Black people, they tend to be much longer, even for the same the same crime. So it's clear that there are biases in the educational system, and they work against Black people. I think what doesn't help is that when you think about role models, again, when you look at teachers, are teachers representative of the overall population? One of the things we do in the corporate space is we do a lot on unconscious bias, do a lot of work on unconscious bias and trying to understand where people's biases are when it comes to gender, ethnicity, and so on and so forth. Everybody has biases, including teachers, including schools. So I think it's important to recognize them and understand, where they are and try and break them down. So I think social deprivation, the lack of role models, and then finally this bias in the educational system. And what we can do, I think we can educate the system, break down some of those social barriers, but also we can act as role models. In the absence of role models in the teaching environment, people like me can go into schools and say there is another way, and the way is through education. And look what it can do. And I think that, when I grew up in Cheetham Hill, and I look at the Black boys, in particular boys here that grew up around me, a lot of them had no hope, felt they had no hope. They felt that what was the point in going to the educational system, because the system's rigged. So actually, having role models who've been through it and done it should help to pull others through as well.
Now, you must have heard about Stephen Lawrence, I believe.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And the Lord Macpherson report.
Yes.
What was fundamental in the Lord Macpherson report was that they said in that report that Britain is institutionally racist.
Mm.
What's your comment on that? Where do you think we are from the Stephen Lawrence saga, and where we are now in terms of ethnic, let me say, race relations?
Yeah. So I think there's still a lot of challenges. There's still structural barriers which stop people from progressing. We mentioned in the corporate sphere. There's still, huge anomalies in stop and search, in length of sentences, in people dying in police custody, in mental health. And I think it's really time to have a real, and we have been doing over the last few weeks, having real conversations about what those structural barriers are and how we look to eradicate them. It'd be very interesting if there was another report and what that would say. I think it's probably time. It's probably time to say, years from the Macpherson report, where actually are we in terms of these institutions? Because we've seen lots of diversity initiatives in the police force, in the NHS, in education. So it'll be good to see and really take stock and say, has it really made a difference in breaking down some of those structural challenges?
Now, on the last note, I want you to look in the eye of a young Black person watching this program now. And what message have you got for him? What should he or she look for to follow in your footsteps? Watch them in the eye, look at your camera and say something.
So I personally think that resilience, you have to be resilient, and you have to recognize that you will fail. But failure isn't necessarily a bad thing. Failure, if you learn from it, can actually eventually be very rewarding. I myself, I can go through my career and identify a number of times where I've been knocked down. So it's not really you getting knocked down which is important, it's how you bounce back from those knockdowns. As a Black person in a majority white business, which will probably be the case for most people, there will be lots and lots of times where you're going to have to be resilient in order to succeed. So stay resilient and bounce back from any failure.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. That was our brother Justin, who is Britain's most influential investor. This conversation is continuing on our website, www.bentelevision.com. Thanks for watching. You are because I am, and since I am, therefore you are. See you next time, same time. Bye.